This is America. We speak proper English here, Miss Whitmore snapped, stabbing her red pen in the air like a gavel. Jamal didn't move. His fingers tightened against the edge of his desk. 30 pairs of eyes locked onto him some wide. With discomfort, others already laughing behind curled fists. Miss Whitmore held his paper up like a used tissue. My pops always say, truth don't need explaining. Her voice curled around the sentence like it tasted sour. That's not how educated people talk. This is nonsense. A few giggles, one cough. The air turned electric. Jamal blinked, unsure whether to speak or shrink. He wasn't used to attention, not like this. You'll never pass writing if you talk like that, she added, stepping closer to his desk. What is this? Urban poetry? Street slang? It's certainly not English. He looked down, hands folded in his lap. The words she mocked were his father's. Words spoken at dinner, on car rides, late nights on the porch. Words that always made him feel seen. But here, they were ammunition. Don't look so shocked, she said, loud enough for the back row. We have standards in this classroom. And just like that, Jamal stopped being a student. He was a defendant. His voice, his background, his language put on trial, without warning. Ms. Whitmore tore his essay down the center. Rip. Then again. R.I.P. She didn't hand it back. She dropped the pieces on his desk like garbage. When you're ready to write something coherent, you can resubmit. The class went dead quiet. One girl gasped. A boy in the corner covered his mouth. But no one moved. No one said a word. Jamal stared at the scraps. They weren't just paper. They were late nights under the covers, scribbling in a notebook. They were revisions during lunch. They were his story, his father's voice, wrapped in his own rhythm. And now they were confetti. He didn't speak, didn't flinch. Just stared at what used to be whole. Mrs. Whitmore turned away, flipping through another student's paper as if nothing had happened. That's enough for today, she said, as if she hadn't just destroyed something sacred. The bell hadn't rung. But for Jamal, class was over. Slowly, Jamal knelt beside his desk, reaching for the fragments. One by one, he gathered the torn lines, careful not to crease them further. He didn't look at anyone. He didn't have to. He already knew there'd be no voice of reason, no hand reaching out. As he picked up the last sliver, his mind churned. Say something. Tell her. Tell them. Tell her who you are. Tell her who your father is. But he didn't. He folded the paper, even though it didn't fit together anymore. He felt the pressure rise in his chest, a scream that had no exit. His silence wasn't weakness. It was resistance. The kind passed down. The kind that lets you hold on to your dignity when everything else is taken. No tears. No begging. Just the quiet rage of being judged before being understood. And he sat back in his chair, paper pieces in his fist, not saying a word. Jamal stared at the jagged lines in his hand. He thought about his dad, about how people leaned in when he spoke. Not because his grammar was perfect, but because his truth was. Truth doesn't need explaining, his father would say, shaking his head like he already knew what the world was too. Afraid to admit. Jamal held the paper tighter. He wanted to yell at it. To say, my father is Dave Chappelle, and you just failed a legacy. But his lips didn't move. Only his eyes did, hard, focused, unbroken. A whisper escaped, low and only for him. She doesn't even know. Then silence, not the defeated kind, the dangerous kind, the kind that says, you will hear me eventually, one way or another. Write it like you mean it. Dave's voice echoed in Jamal's head as he flipped open his journal before sunrise. The house was still. His pen moved in silence ink, bleeding into raw thoughts no one would ever read. He didn't need to tell the world who his father was. didn't need to flash the last name like a pass. He wanted to be seen for himself, not for comedy, not for fame. Just for the words he carried out at school, he faded into the background on purpose. He didn't raise his hand unless he had to. Didn't correct teachers when they mispronounced black authors. He let his writing speak, even if they never truly listened. Still, every word he wrote had weight, because even if they didn't know the name, he did. And with that came pressure and pride, and a responsibility he never asked for. The prep. School was polished like a museum. Ivy League banners draped the walls, but the eyes behind them barely blinked when Jamal passed. "You're so articulate," a teacher had said, smiling as though it were a compliment. Then added, "Where in the city are you from again?" "I'm not," he replied. But the woman had already turned back to her clipboard. That week, a boy from the debate club reached over in the cafeteria and touched Jamal's hair. "It's like..." "Cool," the boy laughed awkwardly, as if his curiosity gave him permission. Jamal didn't flinch, just stared at his tray until the moment passed. He sat alone at lunch, earbuds in, pretending the world was quieter than it really was. Every hallway he walked felt longer than it should. Every conversation clipped short. Every look reminded him he didn't belong. Not really. They saw his skin, his scholarship, his silence. But not him. And the worst part? He was getting good at pretending that didn't hurt Dot at dinner. His mom stirred the gumbo and said, "Baby, you just gotta survive that place. They don't get you yet, but they will." Dave cracked a joke about passing English with a name like Chappelle, but his eyes stayed fixed on Jamal. He saw the quiet, the fatigue. "You ain't writing about this, are you?" Dave asked. Softly, Jamal shook his head. Not yet. Later that night, flashlight under the blanket, Jamal scribbled across a half-torn page. "They call me clear when I speak foggy. Praise me for mimicry, not memory. Say I'm smart when I sound like them, but say nothing when I sound like me." He wrote to remember, to resist, and to breathe. At school, he tightened his vowels, lowered his voice, and checked his tone. Even the way he walked felt rehearsed. At home, it was rhythm and slang and laughter that shook the walls. He belonged in both, but fully in neither. Each shift between identities chipped at him. He wasn't faking it, was survival. But some nights, he wondered which version of him they'd actually listen to. That week, he opened a blank document. No grammar filters, no code switching. Just truth. The title? "My Words Ain't Broken." And this time, he wouldn't edit for their comfort. "That's authentic dialect," Miss Whitmore said with a smile, circling the word "ain't" in bright red ink on Sarah's paper. "It really brings the Western story to life." Jamal watched quietly as the class nodded approvingly. Then it was his turn. He handed in his essay, confident he had written. "My pops always say, truth don't need explaining." But when she handed it back, the same word "ain't" was circled again. Only this time her smile was gone. "That's not correct English, Jamal," she said sharply. "You need to write properly if you want to succeed here." Her tone was polite, but the sting was undeniable. Jamal swallowed hard. The double standard wasn't new, but it never got easier. Sarah's "ain't" was praised as creative flair. His was labeled sloppy and urban. He looked down, feeling the weight of those words settle deep. Later, at the parent-teacher meeting, Ms. Whitmore folded her hands and spoke carefully to Jamal's mother. "He's bright, but he'd do so. Much better if he dropped the street lingo," she said, eyes flicking briefly to Jamal's quiet figure. A more professional tone would open doors. Jamal's mother frowned. "He's never used that kind of language at home. And he's not from the inner city." Ms. Whitmore hesitated, then shrugged. "Well, sometimes students benefit from more extracurricular activity, sports, for example." It might help him engage better. Jamal sat silently beside them, pretending not to hear the subtle dismissal. Inside, frustration bubbled, but he said nothing. Week after week, the pattern became impossible to ignore. His friends received praise for raw expression and honest voice. Jamal, meanwhile, was handed CS with notes like grammar, sloppy, and lacks clarity. Every paper felt like a test, not of his writing, but of who he was. One afternoon, he overheard a classmate say, "It's like they want him to erase himself." Jamal clenched his fist. The words weren't wrong. They just hurt too much to say aloud. Determined to avoid more criticism, Jamal spent hours poring over grammar guides and rereading Ms. Whitmore's comments. He rewrote his essays, cutting slang, softening his tone, choosing words he knew she would approve. When he finally handed in a polished, technically flawless paper, she nodded with satisfaction. But Jamal stared at the returned essay, feeling invisible, his voice lost somewhere. Between the lines, was fitting into their standards worth sacrificing who he was? That night, frustration turned to determination. Jamal poured every ounce of himself into a new essay, raw, poetic, blending his father's humor with his own pain. It was sharp, vulnerable, honest. For the first time, he felt proud of his words. When he turned it in, hope flickered briefly. Ms. Whitmore barely skimmed the page before dismissing it. "Unfocused," she said flatly. And just like that, Jamal's truth was torn down again. Jamal's hands trembled slightly as he stepped forward, heart pounding against his ribs. His voice didn't waver, steady, clear, a rhythm born from years of silence and unspoken truths. "My words ain't broken," he declared, each syllable thick with pride and pain. "Your ears just ain't learned to listen yet." The classroom froze. Some faces were wide-eyed, struck by the raw power behind his lines. Others nodded slowly, as if realizing something they hadn't before. He spoke not just as a student, but as a messenger bridging a world that often ignored. Voices like his. For a fleeting moment, Jamal owned the space. His culture, his language, his story demanded respect without asking permission. Suddenly, the silence shattered. "That's enough. Sit down." Miss Whitmore's voice cut through the stillness like a knife. Jamal froze mid-sentence, breath caught, confusion flooding his eyes. The room shifted, unspoken tension snapped, replaced by awkward glances and uneasy silence. Where there had been all moments before, now lay shame and discomfort. His words were silenced before their final beat could land. Ms. Whitmore held up Jamal's essay, red markings glaring like accusations. "Grammar incorrect, message sloppy, style defensive," she pronounced, voice cold and final. She waved the paper like a banner of failure before the class. "This," she declared, "is why standards exist. Creativity is no excuse for laziness." Jamal's voice disappeared beneath the weight of her condemnation. An F marked his paper, a public declaration that his truth was unacceptable here. Amidst the quiet, a student covertly pressed record, capturing the moment that no one else dared to challenge. The bell hadn't rung, but Jamal was already moving, clutching the rejected essay in his fists. He didn't cry, didn't shout. His eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Betrayal pressed down on him, a heavy, suffocating silence. He left the room not just physically, but stepping away from dignity denied. Later at home, Jamal sat at the dinner table, silent, and withdrawn. Dave Chappelle's eyes caught the crumpled paper poking from his bag. "You all right, son?" His voice is gentle but probing. Jamal met his father's gaze, voice barely above a whisper. "She failed me. For writing like you." Dave said nothing for a moment, the weight of those words settling between them. Then his face hardened, not with anger, but a quiet resolve. Dave sat quietly, absorbing every word Jamal struggled to say, the weight of disappointment heavy in the room. Jamal's gaze stayed low, cheeks flushed with embarrassment, unsure how to respond to the silence that followed. Then, with a calm that surprised them both, Dave smiled softly and said, "Then let's teach her something about English." No anger, no outburst, just a quiet resolve that sparked something new. Jamal looked up, eyes flickering with the first hint of hope he'd felt in weeks. It was the moment when silence began to crack, and a plan started to form out the next morning. Whispers floated through the school corridors as Dave Chappelle calmly strode through the front doors. His presence commanded attention without a word. Staff exchanged nervous glances. Word spread fast at the office. The principal stammered, barely masking his surprise when Dave requested an immediate meeting. No delays, no excuses. Today, now. Moments later, Ms. Whitmore entered the conference room, her confident stride faltering when she saw who was waiting. The atmosphere shifted. The unspoken tension thickened as she froze, caught between authority and accountability. Dave didn't waste time. With a click, the secretly recorded video filled the room. Ms. Whitmore mocking Jamal's writing, tearing his paper, and handing down the failing grade. Her face went pale, the evidence undeniable. The principal shifted uneasily, realizing the gravity of the moment. Dave leaned in, voice steady, sharp. "I'm not here as a celebrity. I'm here as a father." He spoke of history, James Baldwin, Langston Hughes of hip-hop verses, and barbershop tailies. Language isn't just words. It's identity, resistance, culture. "We didn't break English," Dave said. "We made it move." Ms. Whitmore couldn't meet his eyes. His tone didn't rise in volume, but in weight, echoing through the room like a call for justice. The unspoken message was clear grading. Jamal's language was grading his culture, his very being. Within hours, the confrontation exploded online. The students' hidden recording and Dave's powerful speech spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Hashtags such as #OurWordsMatter and #LetJamalSpeak began trending nationwide. Celebrities, activists, and educators joined the growing conversation about racism, education, and linguistic bias. News outlets picked up the story, sharing clips of Jamal's essay and the viral showdown. The school phone lines rang nonstop. The truth had been exposed, and the community could no longer turn away. The conversation had shifted. What was once a private injustice now demanded public reckoning. Emails flooded the school board's inbox, voices rising together. Former students, current pupils, each sharing stories eerily similar. Papers dismissed, ideas mocked, confidence shattered under Ms. Whitmore's watch. It wasn't just Jamal. It was a pattern, systematic, painful, undeniable. The administration couldn't ignore the wave of truth crashing down on them. A formal announcement came. Swiftly, Ms. Whitmore was suspended pending a full investigation. The school board promised transparency and meaningful change, acknowledging the deep wounds caused by bias and silence, in whispered conversations and online forums. The call for justice grew louder, proof that when one voice breaks through, many more follow. Change began with a task force that brought together educators, parents, and students united by one purpose: reform. Black literature, once absent, took its rightful place on reading lists. Linguists and cultural experts helped shape lessons to honor diverse voices. Teachers attended rigorous equity training, learning to identify and dismantle biases in grading and classroom interactions. The school pledged to nurture every student's identity, refusing to let culture be a barrier to success. What started as Jamal's personal fight sparked an institutional shift toward real inclusion. In a packed auditorium, the buzz of anticipation filled the air. Jamal stepped confidently into the spotlight, the weight of his journey giving power to every word. Dave sat quietly in the crowd, eyes glistening with pride. Jamal's voice, steady and clear, carried a message that transcended the room. Our English ain't broken. It's just been breaking chains. Silence held the moment, then erupted into applause that shook the walls. For once, Jamal's truth was celebrated, not silenced. Back home, Jamal gently smoothed the torn fragments of his essay across the table. He carefully taped each ripped edge, not to erase the scars, but to honor them. The damage was part of the story, a testament to the struggle and the strength it took to reclaim his voice. Pinning the patched paper beside his journal, Jamal created a shrine of resilience and pride. This wasn't just a torn essay. It was a symbol. His language, his identity, never broken, only underestimated. Imagine yourself sitting in that classroom, watching Jamal stand there, silenced and judged. What would you do if this happened at your school? Would you stay quiet or find the courage to speak up? This question isn't just about Jamal. It's about every time injustice is met with silence. Should teachers be trained to recognize cultural expression as valid language? How can our education system better embrace linguistic diversity instead of punishing it? These aren't easy questions, but they're necessary. Join the conversation below. Let's challenge what proper English really means and how it shapes opportunity. If this story moved you, please like, share, and comment. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more powerful narratives that expose truth and inspire change. Together, our voices grow stronger. Help us keep the dialogue alive.